Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Kimberly Hanlon, and I'm one of the founding members of the Family Innocence Project. The Family Innocence Project is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to keep families out of the adversarial court system. Participants in our program agree not to go to trial and instead use our process of binding mediation and arbitration. Our organization is unique in that each family is given a volunteer advocate who provides guidance and support for each of the family members through the process. When families are empowered to make decisions for themselves, the end results are workable relationships and fewer contentious cases for our already overburdened court system. It was a year ago today that we gathered right here in the Van Dusen Mansion for our very first Talk for Family Innocence. We've come a long way in this past year. We've had 3 advocate trainings, and we now have over 30 volunteer advocates who are helping our participants through the process. And we're serving families. We're serving families who are in conflict and in crisis. And those families are walking away with resolution and workability. Going forward, we're going to be training an army of mediators in our cooperative conflict resolution model. And we're expanding, this is Michelle's special, her special deal. We're expanding the music division to give children of divorce a voice for peace. And we're reaching out to even more communities in Minnesota every day. We're delighted that you all are here to take part in our organization's growth and to witness the transformation of family conflict resolution in Minnesota. I'll now introduce you to the founder of our organization, Michelle McDonald. She was inspired to find a better solutions for families after seeing the damage that's done to families in protracted litigation. She's been a family law attorney for over 25 years here in the Twin Cities. And in that time, she had plenty of opportunities to notice that winning a case didn't always mean that the family won. As a society, we've accepted the collateral damage done to families, and children in particular, in the court process because we didn't see that another option was possible. Michelle had that vision to see that something was better that was possible for families. And she had the generosity to share that vision with others, like you here today. And out of that vision came the Family Innocence Project and the wonderful work that the organization is doing for families now. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Kim. I like to say without people like Kim, there'd be no help for people like me. And we have lots of help. It's interesting that Kim said a year ago today because some great things happened today. And a lot of you know that my inspiration for the Family Innocence Project after being in family court matters for 25 years was the case of Benedictus Ambuna. And we'll talk more about him. But I had learned that Pope John Paul II was going to be beatified this time last year, and there was a call for miracles. And one night I woke up and thought I'd try for a miracle. And I looked around, and my husband was sleeping beside me. I thought, I have a good marriage, I have great kids, a wonderful law practice. And then, of course, you know, you start to talk about maybe winning the lottery as your miracle. And it came to me, abolish family court in 1 year. And I kept putting it out of my head because it was career suicide. Well, within a couple of days, I was in court with Benedictus Ambuna. And that case comes to mind because his child was taken away by a wrongful custody order, and his wife was deceased. There was no service of process, and the case went on for several months. I billed about $50,000 in unpaid fees. He could not afford legal services. And after $50,000 in legal fees, the judge vacated the custody orders, removed himself from the case, and said there wasn't any jurisdiction and dismissed it. Promptly, the other attorney filed another case and properly served it. So we were back in court again. I am happy to tell you that that case resolved today in Hennepin County District Court. Judge Kevin Burke signed an order dismissing a case that had been wrongly filed in 2007. I think that deserves an applause. Woohoo! Okay. But the damage to his family was irreparable. I'm just saying, you know, we could do all the legal things, and the damage to the family is irreparable. What we have started with the Family Innocence Project, oh, I forgot to tell you. In that court case, when I was sitting there with Benedictus Umbuna after having, you know, this abolish family court idea in my head, I learned from Benedictus, sharing my faith that day, that he was confirmed by Pope John Paul II in Kenya, Africa. In fact, his mother was going to be a nun. His father was going to be a priest. Instead, they married. They had 18 children. 9 of them were confirmed by Pope John Paul II in Kenya, Africa. So it's kind of, and today is All Saints' Day. Okay. So I'm seeing this as Pope John Paul II's miracle for families. And it's going to happen. And it already has happened. I must report to you that the Family Innocence Project has a process that abolishes court for families. Everybody clap. It's true, because I was sitting around going, well, you know, it's been over a year, you know, what's going on here? And then I realized our project does that. And we've just, with work like Anita Motolinia and Judge Peterson and Judge Aldridge and everybody putting our heads together, we already have the process that abolishes court for families. And we can take that process, firmly have it here, and spread it all over the country. That's why we need an army. We have a little platoon right now. When we had our event last May 31, I had never heard of restorative justice circles. Judge Bruce Peterson spoke at the last event. Judge, could you stand up? He's waving. And he brought to the last event John Miser, who had been studying this for 10 years, just every facets. I had never heard of nonviolent communication. You know, I was just, I guess, immersed in family court and didn't know there were these alternatives. But we have, through the Family Innocence Project, implemented restorative justice circles for families. We meet every Tuesday night at my office. And it's Mike Fink, new graduate. You experienced just watching. He's an attorney, 57 years old. You don't mind if I say? Just became an attorney. I met him on Pope John Paul II's feast day, which was October 22nd. So he's special to me because he called me. Some attorney sent him to me. It was Cass, right? Wow. Cass, about the Family Innocence Project. I brought him to a restorative circle practice just to watch. And what did you say? I'll repeat it.
I said the experience blew the top of my head off.
Yeah. So he said the experience blew the top of his head off. Since, you know, that kind of scared me a little bit. We can't use that term, you know, blew your mind or something like that. Especially with Judge DeSanto that's going to be speaking tonight about what happened in the Glen Sheen Mansion. So after learning about restorative justice circles and how they were successfully used in the family court, for 2 years, informally, with John Miser, family innocence advocates went to New York and studied it. Barb Zorn, myself, joined peacemakers from around the world at the Gandhi Institute in New York to learn to facilitate circles from the master, Dominic Barter. And we are going to have a similar event here, date to be determined, where all of you, anybody interested, can learn this fascinating process. I also want to acknowledge Judge Stephen Aldridge, who's a little hard of hearing. I'm acknowledging. Last November 1st, he was our first brave judge to get up here and speak about eliminating court for families, and he should be acknowledged for that. So you know a little bit about Dominic Barter, which can only be described as miraculous. Benedictus Umbuna, his son Costas, and relative Pamela Chase circled John Miser. Where's John Miser? Who's been doing it for 10 years, okay? And Barb Zorn of the Family Innocence Project, she was circled too. Who's been doing circles for 10 weeks to facilitate a restorative justice family circle at the public library in West St. Paul that successfully resolved a 5-year family dispute. The circle resulted in an action plan with an agreement for a dismissal order signed by Judge Kevin Burke, and he was the 6th judicial officer assigned to the case. So that case is out of the system, and I'm just noticing, can I acknowledge you, Trevor? Hey, stand up, Trevor. This is Benedictus Umbuna's son. Okay. And he was also in family court, actually juvenile court, and it was, I can't even get into that story, but it was wrongful. It was wrongful, and any court, in a case of a good father who cares for his kids and has intact his fundamental parental rights is wrongful, but he now has custody of his 5-year-old and 3-year-old, and is working restoratively with their mother, who is having problems, understandably, to resolve, to keep their family together. Okay, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, because I know most of you might know this, but when I start talking about family innocence, you wind me up. I can't stop talking about it. Okay, so I got to get off the podium here. Okay. Our next speaker is Jerry Schomer. He's a pastor, and at his church that I have attended since the early 90s, and just got involved with this past year, by getting involved after I turned 50, and I found out the retirement age in the Bible is 50. Did everybody know that? So I've retired to something, a higher court, I guess we'd call it. He celebrated 20 years as a senior pastor of Woodcrest Church in Eagan, where I attend. Prior to planting Woodcrest in 1992, he ministered at Bethany Baptist Church in Omaha, Nebraska. He is a graduate of Crown College. Jerry received his Master's of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry degree from Bethel Seminary. But his greatest accomplishment is that he has been married to Deb, referred to as a prayer warrior, for 33 years. Now, Pastor Jerry's favorite verse is 1 Peter 3:18. But I have a new favorite verse that I'm going to share with Jerry, and I'm going to make it your new favorite verse. Okay. I'll advocate for it, okay? It's Matthew 5:17-20. And it says, "Do not suppose that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to complete. I tell you this, so long as heaven and earth endure, not a letter, not a stroke will disappear from the law until all that must happen has happened. If any man therefore sets aside even the least of the law's demands and teaches others to do the same, he will have the lowest place in the kingdom of heaven, whereas anyone who keeps the law and teaches others so will stand high in the kingdom of heaven. Jerry Schuler, your turn.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. First of all, I want you to know I'm speaking only for 8 minutes. So there's some good news. Let me say a word about Michelle. I think you could be a church planter. Actually, I planted Woodcrest. And what you do as a church planter is you gather people together. And she's gathered a great crowd. And the second thing I want to commend you tonight on your friendliness. And I sincerely mean that. I'm a little out of my element. I usually hang out in church circles, not exclusively. But I have found you to be an extraordinarily friendly group. And so give yourself a round of applause. Seriously. And the final thing I'll say before my remarks, yes, Deb and I have been married for 33 years. She is a paralegal, and she actually works with the general counsel at Toro Corporation. So that's about as close as I get to the law. But she knows how to lay down the law, and wasn't in my notes. So, all right. Let me share with you a few thoughts, seriously, for the 7 minutes that I have when it comes to the project that you are very passionate about. I have 3 ideas, and I have 3 stories. My first idea is this, from a pastor's perspective. There is, it seems to me, a measure of risk when child custody decisions are taken away from the parents. Now, in a perfect world, we'd never have to get into those, kinds of situations. But the reality is, that's how the world is. It's a broken place. Now, of course, there are exceptions where a third party needs to come in, where there's abuse or other extenuating circumstances that are of concern. But let me illustrate this particular point. Earlier this year, perhaps you read the story of the Pennsylvania judges who were jailing children for profit. Now, I know this is extreme, but from 2003 to 2006, between 1,000 to 2,000 juveniles received sentences that far outweighed their minor offenses. Now, the judges, 2 in particular, were compensated $2.6 million for sending them to the privately run detention centers. Now, if you read the article, you read the paper, justice was served, and they are now, serving for their misbehavior. And again, let me just say, it's an extreme situation, but this evidence, for me, confirms the fact that parents should have the right to promote the best interests of their children. Good parents who love their children unselfishly will make great decisions. That's idea number 1. Number 2, I'd say it's imperative that married couples see their marriage as a covenant not to be broken. And again, in a perfect world, this would be the case. Yet we live in a broken world. Professor William Daugherty, who I understand was here a little earlier tonight but needed to take off, he wrote a paper. He teaches at the University of Minnesota that was very helpful. He talks about the fact that marriages need to be covenant-based, which I understand to be total unconditional love, a commitment. But he says, rather, our marriages have become very consumer-driven, especially, he says, since the 1880s, when the Industrial Revolution started, and we started producing products, which is great, and then we created needs for those products. And he says that this market-driven approach, I think it's very insightful on his part, has filtered into so many institutions, including marriage, so that we look at our spouse and say, he or she is her agenda or his agenda is to meet my needs, consumer orientation. In opposition to that, he argues very eloquently in his paper, I would highly recommend it, that it's not about consumer-driven, but it's covenant-based. Children when they're in families that are consumer driven, are put at risk. To me, this is a root issue in my judgment. So I come to you tonight as a pastor, and I say to Michelle, you know, part of what you can be about is let's strengthen marriages. And let's see them covenant-based, like Professor William Daugherty from the university talked about. And thirdly and finally, how am I doing? Anyone keeping time?
Take your time.
No, I'm good. There's this old joke, when a pastor or preacher takes off his watch, what does it mean? And the answer is absolutely nothing. Yeah, that's what it is. All right. So you like that? Good. The third and final idea that I have for you tonight, and this is maybe the heart of what I want to say, the power of forgiveness. The power of forgiveness in a marriage and in a family can keep a family together. Forgiveness is a very powerful tool. We are to forgive, the Bible says, as Christ has forgiven us. And this is really the essence of the gospel. Those of you that go to church and ascribe to Christianity, this is the message of the gospel, that broken relationships can be restored and rebuilt. That's the hope. And we really need the power of God to help us in this, don't we? Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." I have a missionary friend who works in Africa, Uganda, and she works actually in the prisons in Uganda, and you can hardly find a more desperate situation. And what will happen sometimes in those prisons is that the women will lie to the guards about who is at fault on a particular situation, and the guards in that culture, in that setting, will take the woman aside and beat her. And you can only imagine what kind of distress and broken relationship that creates among the women in the prison. My friend, who brings this message of the gospel, this forgiveness that God offers to us in Christ and that we can offer to each other, when these individuals, these ladies in the prison, receive that, she tells me, and she writes in her missionary letters, it transforms their lives and restores the relationship. So I've come tonight to say, if it can work in a Ugandan prison, perhaps it can work in our families as well. Now, let me just say this about forgiveness. I read this, and with this I close, in the Wall Street Journal just this past Tuesday. It's an article for your consideration. It's called "When Forgiveness is Not a Virtue," and it puts some wonderful parameters on what real forgiveness is like. Forgiveness, and I encourage you to read it, but forgiveness sets us free to love, and love builds a family, and love keeps a family together. And this is how we can keep, ultimately, I think, Michelle, families out of court and resolve those conflicts and injustices peacefully. So that's my humble thoughts tonight, getting at the root of it. And I thank you for your attention and listening. And I wish you all the best in the days ahead. All right?
Excellent. I like to say, who do you have to forgive more in one day than the people you live with? It's kind of easy to forgive somebody who flips you off or bumps into you or doesn't hold the elevator open for you, and people you work with. So these are the relationships that are, every, moment of every day that we should be, I call it unconditional forgiveness. Just like you should have unconditional love for others, unconditional forgiveness. Well, thank you. You were awesome. And what I want to tell all of you is God works through relationships. We've had lots of speakers here. One I met while he was jogging. I met Mike. He called me. I went to his ceremony where he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Lawyers, he's a lawyer now, and said his oath. And today I met somebody in the elevator. His name was Cliff. You might know him, Judge Aldridge. I met Cliff today from the prosecutor's office in the elevator, and I talked to him about restorative justice. So, keep a watchful eye, because Barb, she was my neighbor. I've known her for 20 years, maybe. My husband, there's my husband. Hello. He's hiding back over there. if I hadn't kept a watch out, you know, I wouldn't have met him. I could have bumped into him a million times. So I'm glad I met you, honey.